So I usually like to start my reviews with a joke or a little quip, and yes, it is generous for me to call them jokes, but that's how I like to start my reviews usually. But today I went to see the horror film Smile, so naturally, I'm never going to smile ever again. Smile is the most effective, terrifying, horrific, and just plain scariest film I've ever seen in the cinema. Just to be clear, none of my favorite films that I've seen that I think would be scary or truly horrific, I've seen in the cinema. I usually don't see horror films in the cinema. I don't even see them at nighttime. I watch them during the day with the lights on. The last thing I can remember watching that truly terrified me at night was Midnight Mass. And I went outside to take the bins out or do something like that, and then I just went, not today. The bins can wait till next week. I'm not stepping outside. I'd rather die. In fact, I don't want to step outside because I am afraid I am going to die. I'm a coward. I'm a little scaredy boy. But for some reason, I convinced myself to go see Smile. And I am so deeply upset. I am so traumatized. I feel sick to my stomach. There has not been a film so affecting, so truly upsetting to me. I don't even know what I just watched. It really is a wondrous film of the horror genre. It made me so deeply upset and so traumatized and so sad. I think it works on so many different levels, and there is maybe 2 moments that I think kind of shook me out of that and made me go, oh, that almost doesn't work, but then it brings it back around, and it just left me in awe. In horrible, sad, I'm never gonna smile and joke again, but in awe. The premise of this movie is so cleverly kind of 2 different types of horror films, and it's all about mental health and how trauma is kind of passed on from generation to generation, or just trauma is passed on, in this cycle of trauma from one person to the next. And the whole film is about this woman getting over this trauma of her mum committing suicide. And just as a story about that, it is breathtaking. It is so sad. It is so gut-wrenching. There is a couple of scenes between her and her sister and her and her mum that are just so painful, so heartbreaking and devastating. The lead performance from, I forgot to Google her name, so it's here. Hopefully I remember to put it here. Or during the edit, I got so sad that I'll never smile again. I just didn't put the name here, but hopefully the name here. The lead actress, she's exceptional. She is such a powerhouse. It is so devastating. There isn't a second of this movie where I didn't feel for her with all of my heart. It was truly wonderful. And then the other part of the horror film that kind of goes on to more of the style of horror film that I like, which is the spooky, evil, sinister, supernatural monster, movie horror thingy. A monster movie. And it's a spooky spirit entity thingy-majiggy, and it's doing a spooky thing. This one really reminded me of It Follows, where it's like, it's an entity and it goes onto one person, then goes onto another. And that one, it's like, it's STDs or whatever. I love a monster movie where you're following it and it's all intense and serious, but then somewhere along the line, our main character goes, I found the pattern. This is what the spooky demon monster entity thingy does, and this is how I beat it. And it's got rules, and it follows them, and there's a way to beat it, and we go through all of that, I was going to say fun. It's not fun, it's incredibly enthralling, and there's maybe one single scene in this film where I wasn't terrified the entity was going to appear. And that is where the film works so effectively. From the very first scene, it is just like on edge. We get this patient and he's muttering, and he's muttering, and just straight away I'm like, oh, this is just claustrophobic, intense. I want him to stop talking. And then straight away she leaves that room and boom, she's talking to the girl who's just had evil, spooky, smiley demon boy entity thingy. And they have their interaction. And from that second, I did not stop feeling sick. I did not stop feeling horrified. That tension that is brought out from this terrified girl, that first girl that has the demon entity smiley face boy, she is so good. It is such a beautiful, horrifying sequence. Everything she's saying is so tense, and then suddenly she's out of frame. We're moving around. Where is she? Boom! And she's just smiling, and it's a big wide. There's no jump scare, and you're like, oh, okay. And then bam! Jump scare. And from that moment on, I was not safe. The whole film, I was just like, they earned that jump scare. Jump scares are my least favorite thing in horror. I always just go, like I'm a jump scare. I just get hit by them. Even if it's in a bad movie, I get hit by them. But I love a jump scare that's affecting. My favorite one is in The Descent. The jump scare in that, and you know which one it is if you've seen that movie, is perfect because they've built up, they've earned the jump scare. And in this film, there's maybe 4 or 5, and at least 4 of them. I think one of them in the middle was like, okay. But 3 of them in the first half, and then one right towards the end, were so affecting, and they were so well earned. The whole film, you're just waiting for something horrible to happen. A horrible little jump scare. But that's the thing that you're hoping will happen to release you for 2 seconds, because as soon as the jump scare's over, you're still back with the tension of it can just happen again and again. And every single scene, the woman is just going slowly more crazy, and I'm going crazy. I'm sitting in the cinema being like, why did I do this to myself? Why did I do this to myself? I could just get up and leave. Because there are the jump scares and the fear that's going to happen, but there's just the upsetting just feeling that like there's an inevitability of her going to die. There's an inevitability of at some point the demon is going to come and her life is over, and just that horror and that insanity that's building in her that just keeps building and building in the whole film. The filmmaking is so well made that like the storytelling is so tight and concise, and it's telling this really interesting story, but it is just so impossibly agonizing. Like, I just felt sick to my stomach. I haven't remembered a film that does this, because this isn't like something new. This isn't something where I'm like, oh my god, I've never seen a horror film like this. Like, it reminds me of like It Follows, Ring, Hereditary. Like, I'm sure there's a billion others if you're a huge horror guy, but this kind of film, just like the way it was produced, the way it ranked up tension, the filmmaking styles, the camera movements, but the music. The thing that really got me was the music. Every single scene, there was a different type of deranged, mental, insane kind of soundscape thing going on, and it always felt unique. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a classic horror kind of sound, like a raw, raw. But sometimes I was like, bing, ding, 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 and like children screaming or chanting, or just so often I'm just like, what is going on with this soundtrack? It is absolutely bananas. It is making me feel so on edge, just like the main character who's just going more and more on edge, and I couldn't handle it. And then anytime the film was like, hey, are you maybe sick of waiting for a spooky, smiley, evil demon boy to rock up and just be like, and smile and just be terrifying, just standing there in a person's body, just smiling? Are you sick of that? Well, maybe here's a little side dish of no one believes her, because why the hell would they believe her? Everything she's saying is psychotic and insane. And that trope is one of my other absolute horrors, and I hate seeing it on screen. It is so painful to watch. Where the main character is in a horror supernatural movie or whatever, you know, and a spooky demon boy is happening, but every single other character in the movie is living in the real world, and they're just like, oh no, that's clearly insane. There's no spooky, smiley, evil entity out to get you. Oh no, you've got the same mental health problems as our mum did. And it's just, oh, it's so upsetting. It's so devastating. Sometimes I feel like in a film, they do this trope, and all the people who are living in the real world, they're like, oh, how could you possibly, how could you think that? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You saw the thing too. You're just choosing not to accept it. But in this, she's like, I'm the only one that can see it. I'm the only one that can see it. And you're like, oh my god, this doesn't look good for you. Like, of course they're going to see it this way. So it's so painful and horrifying, because you know it's real, because you've seen it. You're watching the film, and it's a film. But just, I found that balance and that kind of juxtaposition of these two characters, and how like the main character has to deal with all these other side characters, just so traumatic and so upsetting. And as this kind of trope goes in these type of horror films, I think it was done exceptionally well. It was so good. This film borders on being too over the top, or maybe just too like silly at times. Like, there are so many moments that could just play as really silly and cheesy and like just not work at all for the absolute terror and horror that they're trying to do. Like, a character will just be like, she's talking to the character and she's like, how's your trauma going? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, you don't understand. And she's like, should you get the phone? Maybe get the phone. And she picks up the phone, and then that person is talking, and she's like, oh no, it's the spooky evil entity thing. And then that character just starts going, and starts walking towards her and moving, and it's just like, it gets so close to being like too much, and it being like, oh, okay, now it's a bit like silly and cheesy and campy now. I don't know exactly what word it will be, but kind of losing that just impossible dread. And I think what's so effective is just the performances. The soundtrack is just exceptional. It is so good. It's so unnerving, and it's so kind of unique and different at points, while still feeling familiar in some kind of classic kind of horror-y ways. But it is a really unique, bombastic, insane, like unnerving soundtrack. But the performances are so real. The main lead, she is just so good. I never really felt there was a moment until right at the end that kind of made me go, oh, I'm kind of thrown out of this. And I think just having the monster be people that people that could have died, but like, are now back as the entity, or just people you think you're just talking to normally, but they just smile. It's such a simple yet effective horror kind of villain. Like, just people oh, but they're smiling, but just the worst smile you've ever seen. Like, makes the Joker look like he has like a friendly, not terrifying smile. It really just takes that idea of the Joker being this horrifying, manic, kind of like, ha ha ha, kind of villain and being like, oh, the juxtaposition, he smiles, but he's scary and spooky. That, essentially, but a modern horror film, which is what this is. It's what it is. And it's so affecting. It is so painfully terrifying. Like, I felt just sickened and angry. I'm like, how dare this filmmaker find such a simple premise and use it so effectively, using all the tricks that he's kind of learnt from all these really successful other horror films. I could list them all, but there's someone who knows more about horror that could list them all. I feel like some people might almost find this a little bit derivative, but I just found it so clever at utilizing all these elements and creating such a clever, just horrifying, like just truly a scary, spooky movie. There was one moment though where I was like, oh no, I think the whole film not is ruined, like it's still very, very affecting, but I won't be able to say this whole film works for me. I'll have to say 95%. And that's a shame, because I hate when a horror film is so good, but then right at the end you're like, oh, the sails have been knocked out of me. Other metaphor, and you're kind of like, oh, that's a shame. Because sometimes an ending can just kind of sour you, because it's the last thing that, the lasting impression is that final moment sometimes. And it's the moment where she gets to the house and she's like, I've got to, meet my mother, the trauma of my past. And she's like, why are you doing this? And the mother's like, because it's so easy to sleep inside your body. Oh, I'm spooky, smiley boy. And it gets really, really big. And it kind of goes all CGI. And there are a couple of shots that are spooky, but she's a big CGI monster now. And she's all like, wah! And then she's like, you're in my mind, you can't escape my mind. But then she's like, you're also in my mind, you can't escape my mind. And then she puts a fire on and it lights up and there's a big CGI giant mother smiley demon on fire. And then she beats it. And I'm like, sorry, what? What are you talking about? Oh, and she's like driving home. I'm like, oh, on the one hand, I like that this film is in a horrible, sour, dour, downer of a film ending, and it's like a hopeful thing, like she's overcome her trauma. But that to me wasn't what the film was leading to. She was leading to killing herself with no one watching, because that's the rules of the demon. She wasn't going to kill someone. And then almost got a bit cheesy when she's like stabbing the patient's screaming and laughing, and then bloody Kumar or Harold or Kumar, one of them, I can't remember which one it is. I haven't seen those movies for a very long time. I want to say Kumar. It doesn't really matter though. The doctor from House, and he's all like, and he rips his face open, and I'm like, that's the type of horror film I like to watch. That reminds me of like a Hellraiser or something, where it's spooky and scary, but a bit over the top and fun. And that was one moment where I'm like, oh, that almost lost me with like how serious and intense this film is. But then when she's a big CGI monster and she's on fire, I'm just like, this is your end? But then suddenly I realize how truly genius it is to lead up to this big moment where she thinks she's overcome her trauma. And it does get kind of over the top and big CGI, spooky fire and everything. And you're kind of meant to feel like when she's driving home, being like, oh, she won. And you're lulled into a false sense of security. It is so genius. I felt so just like, oh, there are no more spooks and scares, no more jump scares for one. And then suddenly it started creeping back when I suddenly realized this conversation with the boyfriend, she's gonna turn. She's gonna suddenly be like, actually, and kill herself in front of him. But then no, twist, boom, he's there, and he's the smiley, spooky, evil, deviant boy of dreams or nightmares or whatever he is. And she runs outside, realizes she never escaped, she never burnt the thing on fire. She runs back inside when she sees he's actually arrived, and the cycle is going to continue. And we get this crazy moment where it rips the face off. It's this big fleshy demon, it crawls inside her mouth. And then we get the ending that I did think was going to happen, where we tragically see the main character with the smile, and she dies in front of her ex-boyfriend, the only one that believed her, and the cycle continues, and that horrible, sick sense of just pain, just horror and pain, and just sadness. That's what the film left me with. And having that little twist at the end, where it almost got too silly and big and dumb, I think works so effectively, lulling me into that false sense of security that ending didn't make me go, oh yes, like all horror films, where they're like, we beat the thingy. Oh no, the thingy! And the cycle continues. It just made me feel like so horrified at the inevitability of it all, and the idea that did any of the others think they escaped only to realize they didn't escape. And it's just so tragic and painful, and it really does make you think of like people with trauma or with mental illness, where you might think you've escaped something, but sometimes you just can't, because it's just It's a really horrible, sad, depressing kind of message in a way, but I think it really works because the film is just sickening. It's a horrible, intense, awful ride. I don't know if I'd ever want to watch it again, but honestly, it really blew me away. It could be a masterpiece, or maybe it's derivative. I don't know. I actually don't really watch that many horror films because they leave me like this, where I'm just super upset, and I was like, I actually wanted to go to bed tonight so I could, wake up to work and not want to die, but I guess I'm, staying up all night and watching reruns of insert your favorite sitcom. I don't want to say one that you don't like. Like and subscribe.